All right, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kelly Byer, and I'm the Assistant Director for Alumni and Engagement Events at Iona College. I'm also a proud alumni. As a member of the Office of Alumni Engagement, I would like to formally welcome you to our first ever virtual homecoming. The Iona College Office of Alumni Engagement is your connection to everything Iona. From professional networking to events, Iona continues to provide opportunities for our alumni long after graduation. Our office focuses on keeping our graduates connected in many ways, so please be sure to update your contact information on our website, that's www.ionaconnection.com, to receive special alumni communications and invitations to many events we will host throughout the year. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. As you know, each year we look forward to gathering together in the fall to celebrate being Gales, but this year has been very different. Our preparation and planning for Homecoming 2020 has been ever-changing due to COVID-19 precautions and regulations. So I'd like to personally thank our alumni, friends, campus community, and students for joining us this weekend as we try to put the home in Homecoming 2020. Please don't forget to share your photos with us on social media using the hashtag GalesAtHomecoming or by submitting them to alumni@iona.edu. Without further ado, welcome to our COVID-19's impact on sports with Mike Damergis, class of '89 and '06. Today's discussion is about the sports media landscape, which was already changing before COVID-19 brought the industry to a halt. Now, with a focus on how teams, properties, and broadcasters are using digital channels to drive engagement, industry could be looking at a new normal. Today, our very own Mike Damergis with special guest John Martin from ESPN and Jonas Schwartz from SNY will be discussing the overall impact of COVID-19 so far, what's to come, and what the sports media landscape could look like in the future. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. And Mike, I'm passing it on to you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. And we have some great guests here. As you mentioned, Jonas Schwartz from SNY and John Martin from ESPN. And through the years, I've run into John. Of course, he lives in White Plains, but I see him more at the stadium. And he is the executive producer for ESPN Radio, play-by-play broadcast ESPN, Sunday Night Baseball, the NFL. And John, of course, let's first start things right off at the bat. The impact of broadcasting at the games. It's changed drastically where the analysts and the play-by-play people are not at the games covering them traditionally up in the booth. They are doing it from remote locations as you produce from at ESPN, John.
Well, yeah, Mike. I just finished doing both the wild card round for Major League Baseball and Division Series, and both of those were originated at ESPN. So that was a new experience for me and a new experience for our talent. Once we got the hang of it, we were able to get through it. But I know it was for the analyst and the play-by-play guy, it was a difficult transition because for all the technology, you're not on site, you can't see the whole field, you cannot interact with the coaches, managers, players, and it really hamstrings them in terms of what they're normally able to bring to the table. But having said that, again, we were able to, I think, replicate what would normally be a pretty solid play-by-play broadcast.
And Jonas, and of course, Jonas will just announce that is a diehard Jets fan, much like myself. Yes. So we feel each other's pains through telepathy. Jonas, you do the studio shows at SNY, and one of the big things is that, and Rich Samiti referenced it yesterday, is that reporters don't have access to the locker room. So it's hard to get a vibe of what the team is going through. Now, we know the Jets are struggling, obviously, both 0-5 with Giants as well. But it's difficult to get a real vibe, really put your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the locker room. And how's that impacted you during your studio shows?
It's interesting because, it's sort of what John was just speaking to, which is everything that you can replicate what you did, but you can't do it as well. And so just as John was mentioning how, his guys are not on the scene, so they can't tell you what's going on behind the scenes, behind what the camera's showing. And for us, I used to go to the Jets facility, about once a week, once every other week at the very least, and you would be able to talk to people, not on Zoom interviews with 40 other people on them. You could actually pull somebody aside and say, hey, what's really going on with this situation? Sometimes they would give you some information and sometimes they wouldn't. but you had a better chance of getting that information than you do now, certainly. And teams we know and leagues want to control their messaging. It's one of the most important things to them, and they're not controlling their messaging, so controversy happens, or in some cases, the truth behind certain situations, like with the Jets and Le'Veon Bell, which just happened. They don't want that to be out in public. They want to control that message, as any business would. So if you don't have access behind the scenes, you're just getting what's in front of the camera and what's in front of the scenes that the teams and the leagues are putting in front of everybody.
Yeah, John, you might remember this as you're a young reporter back in 1978. There was a reporters' strike, and the Yankees really credit the fact that there weren't reporters in the locker room at the time that helped them really blend as a team as Bob Lemon took over for the Yankees, and they went on to really steal the AL East from the Red Sox and then beat the Royals in the playoffs and come from two games down in the World Series. This is kind of a bad precedent that's being sent of having the teams keep having the reporters at a distance. And it's a big deal in the New York market, particularly Boston as well, because the reporters are quite different in the New York market as opposed to, say, a Kansas City or Carolina.
Yeah, Mike, I don't think there's any question about that. And to Jonah's point, it's a controlled situation. I think if you watch events that are taking place, and if you watch some of the post-game interviews that are done via Zoom, the reporters in many cases aren't or don't feel, I guess, as able to really confront players on certain aspects of what may be going on with their teams. The questions, I think, in many cases are somewhat muted. And also the fact that, for these players and for their, PR people, things can be cut off at any time. So I can tell you this, that when I just did the division series, what baseball does during the postseason, the clubhouses are closed, but they are open at specific times to the national rights holders. So that's Fox, TBS, and ESPN Radio. And we were still able to do Zoom meetings with the managers. So last week I did the A's and the Astros, and we had about 15 minutes before each game on Zoom with Bob Melvin and Dusty Baker. And it was interesting to hear Dusty talk about, because he's so hands-on, to hear him talk about even how he feels somewhat shackled because he doesn't get in the clubhouse as much with his players and find out how are things going. So he has all these individual meetings going on pregame, which has really changed in many ways. Again, how he interacts and how he tries to bolster his fellows, bolster them up.
Jonas, take us back to March when this whole thing hit, and you think about it. Spring training is really the bread and butter for SNY. The Mets are the big ticket. We had March Madness coming, the NFL draft, the NBA playoffs were gearing up, NHL playoffs were about to start. Take us back to that time and how that impacted SNY, and you as a host and other hosts had to really adjust on the fly. This is something unprecedented. This is something that we've really never dealt with before.
Well, all of a sudden I had a few months where I didn't drive to Lower Manhattan once, which was interesting to say the least. The mileage of my car benefited from that. But, it was interesting. When everything went down with the Utah Jazz, Rudy Gobert, we were in the studio, and I know a guy who's a big friend of your program, Mark Malusis, and I were debating what the impact of this was going to be. And nobody could tell at that time. And at the most, what'd you think? It would be a few weeks. No one had a true understanding of what was going on. A few weeks, and then maybe we'd be back and they delay some tournaments and we go from there. And I remember saying to Malusis, well, it's like baseball. They take a couple weeks, they stop the spread, and then when we're back, we're ready for opening day. I mean, how naive does that sound at this point? So everything that is, very well-rehearsed routine for a studio show, very, the production value, very high, has now been sort of reduced to a glorified way in which I did it when I broke into the business. I set up my camera and I check my audio. I stare into the camera and I do it just like when I set up a bureau shot in Pocatello, Idaho in 1999 or 1998. Maybe I'm shaving a year off my life. And I used to do Friday night high school highlights and I was covering Idaho State, whose AD at the time was Irv Cross, who anybody who used to watch the NFL today will recognize. And so that's what it was. I had 3/4 gear, shooting my own stuff, and go set it up and go do it. And this is different than at SNY, where I had a makeup person patting me every second I walked, and lighting people turning me here and there, and audio people. And guess what? All that makeup and all that in the audio, they make you better. I mean, it makes it easier. It makes you be able to solely concentrate on what you have to say. And so we went through all those periods of times we started doing things at home, and we got used to doing things at home and got better at setting it up and more used to the routine, but it's never going to be that high production value. Now, do you need that high production value as much as we thought? Maybe not as much, but it's nice to have. But I think we've taken a lot of things with SNY is now putting a big push into digital shows that was based on what we sort of learned and how we learned how to do it during this period of time.
And we're here with Jonas Schwartz, a studio host at SNY, and John Martin, executive producer at ESPN Radio. And John, as a producer, what are some of the difficulties you face now and you see moving forward as there is uncertainty with the COVID virus and on how broadcasts have to go on? And I think of all the broadcasts not affected by it, football seems to be, fans aren't complaining about it. Baseball, there's a lull in the game, so you want the reaction, particularly up in Boston, in New York, and such like that. What are some of the problems you see facing a future broadcast in professional sports?
Well, I think one of the problems is how much the financial side of like the SNYs and the ESPNs, those people are going to get involved and be, decision makers, because to Jonas' point, and Michael, you've you've alluded to it a bit too. There's been a realization, I think, in the upstairs offices that, well, this can be done, and this can be done at a lesser cost, because if you're not paying for travel, if you're using less people in terms of your staffing, all of that impacts the bottom line. And currently, essentially, especially with the way the economy is going, that's a big thing. I can tell you, I did the Jets 49ers game on site in week 2, and we were limited to half of our normal complement of people in the booth. We had 4 people in the booth, so that impacted our play-by-play guy, because we couldn't have a statistician. We had an analyst, we had him, we had the technician, and we had me, and I helped out our play-by-play guy who was spotting. I helped him out as a spotter as well. And that took away from how I would help the analyst or just really pay close attention to the broadcast for things that I might pick up or I might see on the field, or possible misstatements that we need to correct. So that's an initial impact. In terms of doing it inside, last 2 weeks, both of our talent, play-by-play guy and analyst, had large screen with program, so they could see real time what was going on. And in the middle was a multi-viewer, which gave you an all 9 in football and all 22. So essentially you could see the whole span of the field, but you can't see it up close, and you can't see player reaction, and you can't look into dugouts or on sidelines and see what's going on after plays. If a coach and a player are having a discussion, if a manager is, talking to a pitching coach or a bench coach, and you could also look into the bullpens. But when that technology breaks down, as happened before our first wildcard game coming out of Dodger Stadium, somebody had switched a plug between the division series, between the wildcard and the division series, and we did not have any picture or anything coming out of Dodger Stadium as late as about 15 minutes before broadcast. So finally,
imagine everybody was calm about that, John.
Yeah, exactly. I was pretty calm because I didn't have to worry about it. I had people around me that were, losing their minds. But until about mid-game, we didn't have access to press box audio. It was net return, and then you're trying to sync up the natural sound, bat crack, with the net return. So, there were these things behind the scenes that you normally, wouldn't encounter. And I hope that down the road, decision makers don't look at this and say, well, this becomes the norm, or maybe half of what we do or 3/4 of what we do, we can do remotely. And we'll only send people to select games, because I think you will lose a lot. Jonas, as you talked before about, being behind the scenes and getting that reaction and, having a feel for really what's going on, so you can do your job, completely.
John, I think it was a couple of years ago when the Twins went up to the Bronx and they carried the Yankee feed to save the cost of bringing the radio crew up and the TV crew up to save on those costs. Particularly baseball more than football, but and you could allude to this, Jonas, of the success of SNY over the last few years. People want to hear from their local team. They don't want to hear from if you're a Twins fan, you don't want to hear the Yankee broadcast. You don't want to hear the Red Sox broadcast. Baseball, particular, and basketball and hockey, it's very, very localized, and that has been much the success of what SNY does. And if they lose that and they lose the feed, or a reporter might not know the Jets locker room on the road, that's going to affect your broadcast, Jonas.
There's no question. And I from our end, I thought, like Gary, Keith, and Ron on the broadcast did a very good job, even though they would be in a dark city field and the game was, could be thousands of miles away in Florida, for instance. They did a very good job replicating, I think, doing their best to make you feel as though they were there, all the while acknowledging they were not. And what John keeps coming back to is, especially with baseball is all about setting the scene, right? There's all those lulls in the action. It's all about painting the picture of not only what the audience can see, but what they can't see. And if you can't see it, you can't lie to them and make it seem as though you do. And that's the thing we've all run into. We're all trying to give it to the audience in the exact same way they're used to. But we don't want to lie to people and have them, trying to put out there that we are in the same situation we were. Everybody has to acknowledge where we are. And we bring up all of these things. And John mentioned about how you hope the people upstairs don't take this as the way forward. I mean, I am sitting in a situation where we watch the Jets games in a conference room, socially distanced, masked together. And then we go into the studio and we no longer have audio people miking us up. And as I said, Bart Scott is miking himself up. Bart's got his own makeup on at this point. Now, while Bart could break down any defense or offense you ever seen, the technical end for all of us of miking ourselves, there's a mic that's going to break at some point. We're going to go on air with no audio for a period of time. I mean, that's just likely to happen. And just as John talked about how they had to troubleshoot their way through, the technical gap that they had, we're all going to go through that. And we don't have those fail-safe plans in place anymore to ensure that everybody gets the production the way they want. And I think the other thing when we talk about replicating this is important for everybody. So much has been made, and I think rightfully so, out of the audio that broadcasters are piping in, some more naturally than others. But it is funny when you see a play made, and all of a sudden, I was watching one of the Jet games, all of a sudden I heard a loud piped-in booing. And I was, wait, nobody's there. It just dawned on me. I'm like, there's no actual booing. Which audio guy chose this level of booing?
Well, it shows how bad the Jets are. That you hear the booing even when nobody's there.
Now, for the record, I'm not suggesting it was a Jets play. I'll plead the fifth on that for right now.
Jonathan, and I'd love to hear Ron. I'd love to hear Ron Darling, Keith Hernandez talk during the breaks about calling a play-by-play in an empty stadium. John, let's go back to you here. When you called me back in 1994, I'll never forget when I got the call from you, and you called me to be interviewed at ESPN, and you said, "Well, you liked what I did on local access cable. I put together a local access show, and you said you were looking for self-starters." I get the question all the time with students: "What's the future going to be?" And, I feel a little pressed, like, I don't know, but sports isn't going to go anywhere, but it's going to change. You've worked at the top of the chain at ESPN. You've dealt with the expansion of the internet and digital platforms, and everything has to be tweeted and playing small segments as well as doing the whole show. What do you expect that the skills that these students that are enrolled in any communications program, what are they going to need? What do they need to do to be noticed?
Well, I don't think, that the basics change. your work ethic. I think, Jonas talked about being in Pocatello, Idaho. By the way, Jonas, I worked on the NFL Today in the mid '80s and worked with Irv Cross, and you're right. He's a fabulous guy. But I think, to succeed, you have to have a work ethic, and you have to. I've always told young people coming up, I said, make sure you can write, because everything that they see, people write for broadcast. Jonas talked about being a one-man show, but how it has helped him these days. I think in terms of he's easily able to carry a broadcast, because he learned way back then how to adjust on the fly, how to ad lib, and again how to combat any technical snafus that might arise. It's great training. I don't know that I can pinpoint, Michael, where we're going, but I think obviously in this day and age, look at the means we're using today, the Zoom. How has that become part and parcel of everybody's life, for business meetings, for people interacting, for people having like anniversary celebrations or birthday celebrations, and I think expanded the reach, just in your private life. You can just reach across the country and wherever around the world and see people and interact. So work ethic, writing skills, if you have great pipes like a guy like Jonas has, that's a big plus. And in terms of the direction, I think we're probably going to see more of some of this, remote play-by-play, remote coverage of events. It was going that way a bit before COVID, but I think, I have to say, watching some of these broadcasts, you mentioned Gary, Keith, and Ron. There were a lot of nights I watched those games, and unless I knew that they were sitting in the same field, I would have had no idea. They're that good. But I've watched other telecasts around the country, and it's pretty much the same thing. But the one thing that they lose, and I saw this last week, even with an all 9, view, balls hit in the air, balls hit on a line, you cannot, truly call that accurately. And sometimes you have to guess until the camera moves and follows the play. So,
I don't recall during this year, but was there when the Yankees had 2 strikes on somebody, did they get the Ron Guidry crescendo of the fans standing up and cheering? And that's really lost too, Jonas. You could go back to 1984, Dwight Gooden. When he struck somebody out, Shea Stadium electric, and that certainly is lost.
Look, go back to 1983, Dave Righetti on July 4th. You have all those instances. Yeah, I think, that'll be the next step. We get the audio guy to turn up and just ride the crescendo with 2 strikes on somebody. But, I want to jump on what John just said there, because you asked a very good question. It's something I'm passionate about, and I deal with a lot of our interns at SNY about. You said, what's the path? How has it changed? And I agree wholeheartedly with John. It hasn't really changed. How you target yourself, how you market yourself has changed, but the actual basics of, John mentioned, I wrote my stuff that was on the air last night, or at least a good majority of it. I write most of my stuff every show that I do, right up till now. I have not forgotten what it was like to shoot or edit. And it's incredibly important, because that helps me understand what the people I'm working with do. And I can't say that strongly enough to everybody, who is a student. You need to know all ends of this in order to succeed if you really want to be good at it. And, John mentioned self-starter, the drive. You have to have the attitude of, I'm going to go and go until I can't go anymore. And that's what it will always take in this business, because you need to get noticed and you need to do the work. And the work is what will always carry you. If you are sidetracked by all the distractions of this business and how hard it is, you're never going to get anywhere. And it's tough. There are circumstances that are fair. It doesn't matter. If you want to get somewhere, you have to do it, and you have to do it right. And the only way you do that is by learning how to write, and edit, do everything that you need to do, and then running through walls in situations in order to make the work happen. And that never changes. Now, you might have to market yourself on Twitter and Instagram. I didn't do that in 1998 in Idaho. And quite frankly, I still need psychological therapy for what I saw in Idaho, especially being a suburban New Yorker. But nonetheless, you go through it and you build from the experience and you go. And no matter what craziness is around you, you plow through it.
You know, the one thing the internet has given us in the expansion of broadcasting, I was told in the mid 80s, late 80s, you're going to have to move somewhere. You have to go somewhere. I don't think that's necessarily the state where you're going to have to end up in upstate New York or head out to some small station in Cleveland or the one place in Arizona that was considering me. I think that's changed quite a bit, John.
Yeah, Michael. And I think to Jonah's point, not everybody is going to be Jonas Schwartz or Brent Musburger or Scott Van Pelt. Not everybody's going to be on air. So all of these things that go into the broadcast, the writing, the editing, the producing, the directing, I think it's an imperative if you're somebody that wants to be in this business and make it a career, as Jonas said, that you learn all aspects, because you will come to a point, if you have on-air aspirations, that you may find out you're really not cut out for it. But there are other great aspects of the business that you can be in and you can be a success at and have an impact on a broadcast or a telecast. And, you know, to your point, Mike, about, you know, having to go out to like the Pocatello, Idahos, or I know, you know, Pat O'Keefe, who's on locally and also does some ESPN radio now. Pat O'Keefe worked in Alaska at one point. This is a New York kid that worked in Alaska, you know, and now he's back here. And I'm sure he has stories like Jonas has about, you know, being out and being a 1 hour paper hanger. But there are so many other facets of the business now because of the expansion of digital that you don't have to go far afield to get involved and start a career and maybe, you know, move up the ladder there and achieve your career aspirations.
So we'll wrap things up in a couple of minutes here. 20 years ago, I was producing up in Toronto, and I had a host. His name was Bob McCown. I don't know if you ever heard of him. And he predicted someday that we'd have professional leagues with no fans. Of course, not predicting the pandemic, but just the at-home experience was so great. Do you think professional teams, when they start to look towards building stadiums, are going to look more towards building smaller stadiums because the at-home experience and the fears that we're always going to have that might happen, that the MetLife Stadium that'll never happen again. It's going to be way too big. We might actually see football stadiums go down to 40,000 fans.
I don't see it. I'll tell you the only reason why I don't see it. I just think they want as many people in there as they can get. I still think well, I understand your point, which is it's a very good one. The at-home experience has never been better for all of these events, but I still think there's a thirst, and I think that thirst. So when we get back, whenever life gets back to normal, I think everybody will miss this, whether it be going to a concert to see a show, see music, or we're going to see a game live. I think there's going to be a real thirst for people getting back out there and seeing games live. At least I hope so. And so I think, listen, the money making ends of this, it runs through all of it. And I think as many people as they can get in there, there's always that crossover between what's the most money we can make and the best experience we can give. And so I think they're always trying to do that. In some cases, that can be, some less seats. But I don't think they want to limit themselves, especially football with the once a week, entity that it is. I think they want to have 80,000 people in there as much as they can.
John, I'm sure you sit on the boardrooms up at ESPN. They include you in those meetings. ESPN always trying to be ahead of the curve. What do you think the future of ESPN is?
Well, let me just go back to your last question first. I know I sound like a Republican debater doing that, but I think in terms of medically, I hope that we will never encounter a situation like this again, and I think we won't, because I don't think as a country we'll get caught flat-footed. The term pandemic and the specter that COVID-19 presented, I think, Americans, and I think our government always felt it doesn't happen here, that we're somewhat insulated. Those things happen elsewhere around the world. Ebola was a big talking point some years back. It never, got here or took a foothold here, thank God. So I think if a situation like this arises again, the country as a whole is going to be better prepared, and we'll be able to stave things off. So I don't think we'll be put in this same type of situation again. So again, to Jonas' point, I think, the arena sizes and the stadium sizes, they'll remain the same. And as for ESPN, they just keep adapting. People started to decide that they didn't need to have their cable subscription, because on their phone or on their PC, they can see the highlights they want anytime they want. So there was a great deal of cord cutting. So ESPN said, okay, so let's embrace more of the digital technology, and they've managed to stay the course. Look, I think as long as there are football rights and baseball rights and basketball rights, ESPN will thrive. The studio, facet of it, you've seen a greater turn towards where SportsCenter used to be the flagship. I think, the talk show side of it now, and talk shows, even radio talk shows with video, that's part and parcel of ESPN's presentation. And also Fox and CBS SN and run the gamut. So I think the short answer, Mike, is I think ESPN will always thrive. Maybe not to the profit margins that it has in the past, but I think it'll subsist for a long time.
As long as there's games and they're showing them. Right, exactly. Right. And the same goes for us in that sense. Now they might be on a streaming service, it may not be through your cable provider, it might be through your cable provider, but as long as they are, whether it's ESPN or SNY or Yes or MSG or whoever is presenting the game, I think I agree with you wholeheartedly, John. There will always be a place. It just adapts in a different way, but you're absolutely right.
So that means we could keep watching Jets football. Oh, are we?
Yes, yes. Well, if we didn't go through the pain, what would we do? Come on.
Exactly. What would we do with ourselves, right? My self-value with each Jets loss keeps going down and down and down.
We all reach new places every week. What can I tell you? But at some point, it's got to turn somewhere, somehow, right?
Yeah, right. Okay. Not with this head coach. I mean, can we bring back Walt Michaels? Maybe. I don't know. Jonas Schwartz from SNY and John Martin, executive producer at ESPN Radio. Thank you so much for joining me. Wrong one. There we go.
There's the audio stuff. That's what I'm talking about.
There you go. Thank you so much for joining me on this panel as sports media deals with COVID. Thank you so much, gentlemen. And I'll throw it back to Kelly. Kelly, to you.
Thank you so very much. Just again, thank you, Mike, John, and Jonas. We would not be able to have this panel without you. Keep doing what you do. Keep fighting the good fight, as we like to say here at Iona. And go Gales. Happy homecoming, everybody. And thank you again.